Hi. Right, so I'm actually going to take you all through a kind of process here. And you're not just an audience. I'm going to be bouncing my ideas back and forth with you, right? So I'll have to give a speech in a few days. And so I thought, why not give one pertaining to North Korea? So I thought, okay, we'll look at what's new with North Korea. And when I did search, it seems nothing. That's new. Very new. Because we're all so used to North Korea being incredibly belligerent or cropping up in, be it memes or genuine, the Fourth Estate, under the Fourth Estate, and often next to the USA. So when one side is so involved in today's news, why isn't the former? So I decided, why don't we just reuse some old ones since it's just a speech? These are some common headlines that you can often find when talking about North Korea, or the DPRK, as it says there, if I'm not right. The DPRK being the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the official name for North Korea, in case you do not know. None of these have a particularly positive connotation to them. You find words like dictator, nut, trapped, and repression. So, well, I thought that's also really common. Whenever you hear about North Korea in the news, these words are always repeated. So my next idea was, okay, we'll bounce back to something that's a lot more quotidian and accessible and relatable for people of our own age. So for as long as I know, I have been an absolute geek about football. So that's where I turned my head to first. Right. So this is a picture taken back when North Korea won the 2014 World Cup. Of course, I couldn't reuse that since everybody knows France won this year's World Cup. So I thought, okay, I'll move on. What else has North Korea done for us? This was when they landed on the sun. Yeah. If I'm not wrong, should have been about 3 seconds ago. But then, of course, there's a lot of science and technique involved with that, so I thought, okay, I'll let the scientific journalists get to that, and I'll continue with this. Back to sport, and this is actually historic. So this is when Kim Il-sung, so that would be the second leader of North Korea, who has now passed away. This was a poster made about his first time playing golf when he shot 11 holes out of 18, all on his first try, by the way. He'd never even heard the word golf before. But then, while these are really, it's easy to think that these are harmless. But then within our very own social circles and communities, there are people who use this to extreme lengths. So each of these last three examples that I've given you are not something that I put a picture to and came up with just now. These are actual articles that have been reported. Rather, well, they weren't propaganda per se. It was reported by the Western media saying that in North Korea, this is the news being propagated. They have been since disproved, but I won't get into that disproving. I'll just let you know that they have been disproved. So these are a few things. Okay, my last word's been cut out. That's all right. These are a few things that I pinpointed, and I thought, this is how the media does it, and this is actually how the media affects us and how we think about North Korea. So the first one is sensationalism. Very self-explanatory, whatever sells best. Next is clickbait. So obviously in our day and age, all of us, every last one of us, is a lot more vulnerable to clickbait. For example, all I was doing was going on SparkNotes, or was it Shmoop, for my literature essay. I wanted some help with something, and instead I found so many links detailing North Korea's new nuclear plan. Right. So, and next brings me to weasel words. So these are, all of us have been victim to this and probably still are. Again, so weasel words, just to quickly explain what they are things which do not actually have much of an, were not intended, sorry, do not inherently have much of an effect. But then when we hear them, we choose to believe them or take them to signify that this really is a legitimate or genuine. For example, in many articles about North Korea, people, well, they began with experts agree that, or researchers say that. And these just make it look like, okay, so that study and this article about North Korea is most definitely true. Well, no. So that's what a weasel words are, and that's how they are used to manipulate us. Do keep an eye out for this, obviously. So lastly is distraction. The first example of which is ad hominem, which means it's kind of focused on the individual. So for articles which kind of criticize North Korea, they're not focused on North Korean policy itself, and instead choose to attack the leader. We all know that, right? That's very common. In fact, that's probably what we all do as well, because it's just so easy and it's just how we've been conditioned. The next is ad populum, which is more like pandering to the majority. So that would, and now that the majority of the world is already, does not have much, the greatest view of North Korea, it's easier to pander to that view and say, look at all these people, none of them like North Korea, so why should you? So I'm going to go through a case study really quick, okay? So this was Amnesty International. Everyone knows Amnesty International? The NGO? Yep. Obviously, they're very famous because they have been incredibly effective. However, they too, this case study is to show that they too have been victim to this kind of, I'll call it manipulation. Because in 2010, they produced a scathing report on the DPRK's healthcare system. But then later that year, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Margaret Chan, herself took the trouble of spending 2 weeks in North Korea and came back disproving all of what Amnesty International had reported, which included calling North America the country with the least economic freedom, the most famine, and the least press freedom. So Margaret Chan disproved all this, and she even stated that, in her own words, by the way, North Korea has a healthcare system that other developing countries would be envious of. That is credible information, and that is how it's been disproved. And it just goes to show that each one of us is victim to this. So the pictures you see on top, by the way, believe it or not, that's North Korea. It's not all gray, it's not all monotonous, it's not all buildings of the same size and large halls. That's North Korea. Now I'm going to have more of these pictures next to some particular words that I wish to address. Okay, these words, common, right? We've all heard them when we're talking about North Korea. Crazy leaders, we call them dictators. What if I told you North Korea has a parliament? That's their system of governing, and they are democratic. A student who was visiting North Korea for a thesis, he was writing a thesis on North Korea, so he studies at Sciences Po right now, which is a university in France. It's perfectly accessible. So why is it people still use words such as this? And the last one is the one that we are most accustomed to, perhaps, belligerent for the sake of it. Does North Korea have a nuclear arsenal just so that they can boast about who has the bigger button? No. And it's been validated, by the way, by Vladimir Putin. Now, I agree, a lot of you may not like Vladimir Putin himself, but you cannot disagree that the man has quite the acumen and understanding of international relations to put forth a view like this. And he got it spot on. He said, North Korea only began developing its nuclear arsenal because certain Western forces were deploying their ships and stopping them right on North Korea's borders. That is a threat. It is a threat because at the time that this had taken place, so that's a good 2 decades and a half ago, the Cold War was just calming down, and it made perfect sense. North Korea being a communist country, Western powers might want to suppress it. So North Koreans had an obvious fear, and so they developed the nuclear arsenal as a kind of deterrent to say, if your ships which you've deployed there at any point attack us, we can fire back with nukes. Does that make sense to everyone? Right. And that's it. And in fact, there have been reports, well, it's been confirmed by now that Kim Il-sung, at that point of time, when he had launched this nuclear program, did assert that that's exactly why we're developing one. So okay, after all these examples, why is it when we are assessing particular sources of knowledge or information, we always hold ourselves up to a standard of needing to check its credibility or its accuracy, its objectivity? But then with issues related to North Korea, we just seem to be very lax about those expectations. Question for all of you to take home. Right, I'm now going to talk about these two handsome men. So the one on the right is Benjamin Lee Whorf, and the one on the left is Edward Sapir. So these two created what was known in linguistics as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Today it's known as linguistic relativity or linguistic determinism, the only difference being in intensity. So what it is the theory that language, the language used around you or used by you, can affect and influence not just how you see the world, but also your very way of thinking and functioning and communicating, interacting. For example, okay, I'm going to explore this slightly more. You can all see that the primary color there is blue. I want you to focus on the color blue. And so the deal is that there was a study that ancient languages, or the classical languages, just did not have a word for blue. And they asserted that therefore they could not see the color blue. Do you know why? Okay, so William Gladstone was a scholar in the 18th century who was reading through the ancient Greek men, Homer's Odyssey, and he realized that he never used the color blue once. He always described the ocean as being wine dark. And so that led on to the 20th century, where there were several studies made over whether this claim was generally true. And so they went through in Icelandic, Hebrew, Arabic, several Chinese languages, as well as Sanskrit, to discover whether there was any proof of there being of mention of the color blue. Apparently not. The color blue was nowhere to be found in ancient texts. Apparently they had been developed later, but in none of these had there been a mention of the color blue. So this was barring Egyptian and Tamil though, but that's probably because they had the means to create the dye blue. Anyways, that's for another talk. I'm gonna come to this image. So not too long ago, a similar study was made to further examine this theory that ancient language, well, people who spoke those ancient or classical languages just could not see the color blue. So this lady here is from the Himba tribe in Namibia, and they don't have a word for blue, but they have 11 different words for the color green. And I don't mean light green, dark green. Those are shades to us. They have what we see, just different shades. They see completely different colors. But then difficult to see, but I promise it's not the lighting. It's genuinely different. It's a different shade. to guess. Okay, time's up. I noticed a lot of hands pointing in a particular direction, so that's what I'm going to assume is the majority opinion in the audience, so we're going to go with that. So I believe that was somewhere towards the right-hand side. You're right, because that is the one which is a different shade of green. So here's the deal. While we all found it immensely difficult to differentiate that, people of the Himba tribe who took part in this experiment did it instantly. But then they had difficulty telling apart the shade of blue from green, which we'd seen 2 pictures ago. Well, that obviously makes us question a lot of things and the role of language in affecting all of this. And so by extension, that would take me back to where I began, which is the role of the media or the fourth estate in deciding this. To conclude, I'd like to show you, I'd like to talk to you about a further extension. It's not just the media then, so it's even our education system. Obviously, in the aftermath of the Second World War, there was lots of pro-American textbooks being created, which, by the way, we still use today. So who's to say that we're not learning history, we're learning Americans' history? I don't mean to pinpoint this, by the way. I'm just using American as an umbrella term here for that particular Western bloc of those who'd control this kind of information. Because the same Western education system that barred me from learning about Alan Turing because he was homosexual still made me learn about everything that Ernst Röhm, who was also homosexual but was Nazi, did. And that same education system tells me that Hitler did nothing good and Gandhi was all good. Now, I'm not going to further elaborate on this. That is for you to go and do your own research on and form your own opinions on. Because my point is that, my parting message rather, which I want all of you to do, is to take the prerogative, and it's only yours. You can't leave that to the media anymore, and you can't leave that to your textbooks anymore. To take the prerogative to make your own opinions for yourself and never settle for just one side of the debate. Thank you.